It's the Sittin Sportside podcast, exclusively on 1045theteam.com.
Hello and welcome to the Sittin Sportside podcast. I am Eric Hanman here on 1045theteam.com and on youtube.com/team1045. And I am psyched to be back podcasting here a little bit. Going to be flying solo, maybe for a decent amount of time, hopefully to get some other people on the show, maybe some special guests. But really in the next month, going to really focus in on the MLB baseball season, baby. I'm so looking forward to Major League Baseball and all that will come with it, including fantasy and whatnot. And I'm excited to tell you that for the second season in a row, I will be previewing each division, giving you what I think is going to happen, and certain players from each teams that might be good fantasy picks. Might be a little too close to the season for some of them, so maybe I'll do a separate podcast on my fantasy sleepers and whatnot, because I'm looking forward to it so much, not only the MLB season, but also fantasy sports as well. Now, in those podcasts, you will get my 1 through 5, who I will think will win the division, who I think will come in last place. But you know what? We're in a time of tanking in MLB in a way, not like tanking as NBA tanking, which we'll get to in just a little bit, but where there seems to be teams that deplete their roster and maybe to have not as good. We're seeing that a lot with the Marlins. We'll get into that in the NL East podcast, obviously, and throughout the entire MLB season here, the Sittin Sportside podcast. But also, too, there's a lot of parity in the MLB because of that second wildcard spot. There's a lot of competitiveness that really lasts long into the season. So I'm really excited to show you guys or talk to you guys about the MLB season through that lens in the division previews. Looking forward to that. You can catch those on youtube.com/team1045, or you can follow me at EricH1045. I'll probably be posting them on Twitter, and you can get them on YouTube there as well. And just a little inside baseball. If you go to YouTube to an MP3 site, you can download those into MP3s, put them on your iPod, and listen right in your car. Easy as that with whatever aux cord or however you may listen to things in your car. Now, I'm going to keep those podcasts will be probably about roughly 20 to 25 minutes. Maybe a half-hour podcast coming on the Fantasy Sleeper podcast. This one I'm going to keep hopefully around 10 minutes, maybe under 10 minutes. That's the goal for today, and it's not going to be about baseball whatsoever. I'm going to have the preview podcast, and then obviously I'm going to try to, during the season, talk about different upcoming fantasy players, upcoming players in general, rising stars, player, and then obviously player and obviously team shows on the Sittin Sportside podcast here on 1045theteam.com and youtube.com/team1045. Prospects, prospect focal point. So that will be fun as well. But for this next 7 minutes, now I'm at 3 minutes on the podcast. For the next 7 minutes, I'm going to talk about something that has nothing to do with baseball, and that's the NBA. It's the only thing they have in common is the ball in the name, right? So I'm going to talk about my opinion on the NBA here in getting back, and it's been a while since I've been on the podcast, so I'm really excited to talk to you guys about what's going on in this NBA season. And then for me, if you listen to some of my other podcasts, which I doubt you have, but if you have, you know I've kind of been down on the NBA the last couple of years, especially because it seemed like we're on a collision course, at least at the beginning of the season, for another for the fourth time of Warriors versus the Cavs, second time with Durant on the Warriors. Now, throughout the season, the narrative kind of has changed of the Cavs are going to be good enough to get back there, and that changed again, if you will, when it was like, no, it's not going to happen. That was around the deadline when the Cavs made all of the moves that they needed to make, possibly to get back into the groove of things, and they've played well since the All-Star break, even before going into the All-Star break, in some key wins. They beat the Thunder, I believe. So they're still looking like another team that could possibly. They're still looking like with LeBron James. That was always my point. And I never really wavered from this. I know a lot of people were off the bandwagon and saying this is going to be the Celtics' year, maybe even the Raptors of getting out of the Eastern Conference. But when it comes down to it, the Cavaliers are not only back, but I think they're starting to turn back into the favorite. And I don't think they should never have not been the favorite with LeBron James on their roster. So that being said, I'm still a little down on the NBA in the sense of I really only see 4 teams, and that's more than I saw in the past, right? Because I only saw 2 teams making the finals. Now it's kind of 4 teams. Now you do see the Celtics or the Cavs in the Eastern Conference, and you can add the Houston Rockets in the Western Conference as a team that we could see possibly making it to the finals. right, right on par with the Warriors, pound for pound. Right now, record-wise, they've won 13 straight games as of this podcast. So they've obviously been playing the basketball really well with James Harden, Chris Paul in that backcourt. But it really just been a real team game for them. I think Harden's going to win MVP this year. It'll finally be his year after losing out on Curry and then Westbrook last year. So he had some pretty good second place seasons in the MVP voting. He'll get it this year, I believe. But it's just really the whole team steps up. You have really good role players off the bench, like someone like Ryan Anderson, who really could be a guy who puts up a lot of stats on another team if he really wanted to be, has been a good role player for them. Same thing with Eric Gordon. If he wanted to be a guy who's on a bad team, if he wanted to chill out on the Magic or the Kings and just be a player that, accumulated statistics, he could, but he's wants to win, and he's been great off the bench when healthy in shooting the three-pointer. That's what this team has always been good at, but it kind of goes to the next level now when you have two facilitators, not just one, right? You have Harden and now Chris Paul. So it's really looking good for the Houston Rockets to make things competitive in the Western Conference. I still think the Golden State Warriors are going to be tough to beat because of just how good they are top to bottom, especially that starting five. I mean, because you really have the best starting five maybe of our generation. With that starting five, the more they play, they're going to be known as that, because with Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, Draymond Green, and Kevin Durant, and insert player number 5 here, Zaza Pachulia, could be even David West. In the past, it was, I guess with Durant, it's kind of always been a Zaza type or whatnot. But so I still don't see a team challenging the Warriors, and I'm going to say that, and by challenging, I mean I don't see a team beating the Warriors. The team that's going to challenge them is probably the Houston Rockets. Unfortunately for the Spurs, without Kawhi Leonard, even though the record continues to be well over 500, I don't think they're going to be good enough to beat the Warriors. Even if the Warriors somehow faced the Timberwolves in an early round, or they continue to be at the 2 spot and play them in the conference semis, I think that they would even, but dare I say, sweep the Timberwolves. I really think that that the disparity is still that big for a team like the Warriors, the 2 seed in the West, to sweep the 3 seed. The Thunder was a team that I still think can make noise in the playoffs. I'm not going to give up on them, but because they're behind a Pelicans and Trailblazers team that I think that on paper before the season you definitely said they're better. Portland had a lot of coming into the season I liked, but and I think Damian Lillard's continued to take the game to his game to the next level. But still, I would say that the Thunder are kind of that team that you're thinking, okay, I think that team could possibly make some noise in the playoffs still. But then again, if they have if bigs can take over, I'm not sure they're going to be able to beat a team like the Warriors or the Rockets, just because I don't know if the firepower lives up. Because you look at the three-pointer on both sides of those teams, I don't know if they can match it, even with the addition of Paul George and Carmelo Anthony. I just don't know if defensively they're good enough to beat either one of those teams. Not that Houston's defense is fantastic, but with the Warriors defense is too good. I don't see the Thunder really being able to win that matchup. And they could use a player like Paul George is the perfect guy to get. But for Carmelo Anthony, while he can score in the second unit, I'm not sure he's going to be a difference maker off the bench, because that bench is still pretty deep over there in Golden State. So I still think Golden State is the team to beat in the Western Conference, and I think they will get to the finals, no problem, for the 4th consecutive year. I do think that they're also the favorite to win the finals for the third time in the last 4 seasons. In the Eastern Conference, give me the Cavs, man. I think the big name I think they got was I think a lot of people were looking at them and said, oh, look, they were able to get, what was it, George Hill was one of the big names. And I'm kind of blanking on one of the other big names. I think the one that kind of went under the radar was Rodney Hood, and I really think that he is going to be the difference maker from that Utah Jazz team in the future. I mean, he's kind of steps in right into what that Jay Crowder role was, which was defense and being able to score. He's the opposite, right? He plays decent defense, maybe a little bit less than Crowder, but then has that offensive game, can really nail down the three-pointers more consistently, and that's what this team, I think, needed. I think Rodney Hood's going to be a huge acquisition for the Cleveland Cavaliers and is going to spark them into... I know George Hill's going to be big because Isaiah Thomas obviously didn't fit in, even though I still think if you gave it enough time, IC would have been fine there. And then it was Jordan Clarkson was also one of the big names with Larry Nance coming over from the Lakers. The biggest name, though, I think is Rodney Hood. He hasn't lit it up per se, but he has come in and he's done a good enough job with the Cavaliers in knocking down three-pointers and wins over Boston, Oklahoma City, and then the not so good Memphis team. But he's been an impactful presence, I think Rodney Hood has been. For the Celtics, I do think, another Celtics Cavs new look, obviously. Is Kyrie good enough? I do think that they're going to be good enough to get to the conference finals again, but I'm still skeptical about whether or not they're going to be able to stop LeBron James, because they still don't have a LeBron James stopper. They actually gave what I thought was their best LeBron James stopper away in Jay Crowder to the Cavs, who eventually gave him up to the Jazz. And then you even also talk about Avery Bradley could have been your best LeBron James stopper. Maybe a little too small to do that, but he's on a different team now, his third team in a couple seasons now. He went to the Clippers after being traded to Detroit. So don't get me wrong, I still think that the Celtics could make the finals. That's the only other team I see that could make the finals in the Eastern Conference. But I still think the Cavs are not only the favorite, but I think that they will get to the finals 4 straight year, and it'll be the only time in NBA history, I believe, and check me on this at EricH1045, that it's the same 2 teams in the finals for 4 consecutive years. As many people want to think that it was Lakers Celtics in the 80s all the time, it only happened 3 years, and it was only 2 consecutive. It was only back-to-back once. So just the Detroit, Detroit played 2 different teams in the finals. No, just kidding. They played the Lakers twice back in the finals. So that's happened more than once. You had the Spurs and Miami Heat more recently. The Celtics and the Lakers, sure, they played 3 times in the 80s. It happened 3 out of 4 years, but it wasn't as consistent. This is going to be the most consistent time rivalry this has ever happened in the NBA, which is why it's a little more uninteresting for me moving forward. I'm going to give you one more team, though, in the Eastern Conference that I really think if a person comes back and they can build on the momentum that they've had since he left and really come together as a team, that's the kind of the wild card. It's the Washington Wizards. I had them winning the Eastern Conference early in the season. They came out sloppy again. I mean, they weren't as bad as they came out last year, but they came out still kind of sloppy. They've done really well without John Wall, but they have enough in the backcourt with Bradley Beal and that all-star backcourt, Bradley Beal and John Wall. Defensively, Otto Porter gives them a lot in three-point shooting as well. So it does come down to kind of Marquise Morris and Marcin Gortat if they're going to be good enough and be able to hang with other bigs. Who's going to stop LeBron there? I do believe in Otto Porter. I think Kelly Oubre off the bench, he may be a little too small, but give me the Wizards as a team that could really make some inroads if John Wall comes back and takes it to the next level with this unit the way they've been playing, and even get Tim Frazier back from injury, who could be a good backup point guard. This is a team that still kind of doesn't have enough bench power for me, and that's always been the big problem with the Wizards. They still don't have a great bench power, but that being said, I think they have enough in the starting 5 to make things competitive, but the bench will overall be the difference. If they play the Celtics again, I think that will be the difference. The deeper bench for the Celtics will get them the victory in that series. Same thing with the Cleveland Cavaliers. And that's the unfortunate part about the Washington Wizards. Hopefully, they prove me wrong and right at the same time. Wrong that their bench isn't good enough, and right that I think that they're a team that could really come out and beat the third best team in the Eastern Conference, or third most likely team to make the finals in the Eastern Conference. Sorry, Toronto Raptors fans. I've been through it over and over again. They just don't show up in the playoffs, but maybe they can prove me wrong and beat one of the 2 teams, one of the 2 perennial favorites in the East, which is the Cavs or the Celtics. So I went over a little bit of the under 10-minute threshold, but here I am going on 13 minutes of the podcast. I really thank you for listening to this podcast, and I really hope that you check out all the previews that will come up in the next 3 weeks. And like I said, I didn't say this earlier in the podcast, so I didn't say. It's going to be a little interesting with these signings not happening. Some dominoes still haven't fallen yet, right? Alex Cobb, Lance Lynn, the big one. Jake Arrieta hasn't signed. Position player-wise, Mike Moustakas hasn't gone anywhere yet. I believe Jose Bautista and some other outfielders are still out on the board. Matt Holliday, the former New York Yankee. So there's a lot of dominoes that haven't fallen yet. But when we get to about March 8th, that's when I'm going to be like, all right, if they sign on a team that I already previewed, they sign to a team that I've already previewed. I'm going to start doing it by the week of March, around March 8th. Maybe I'll hold out a little bit after and just do a lot in a little bit of time period, right? Because the season's starting as early as March 27th or 28th, I believe, for the MLB. So it's starting a lot earlier this year, and it's starting on a Thursday. So it's interesting scheduling for MLB. And unfortunately, with this really weird off season, it doesn't necessarily give me a full time to preview. Like if Moustakas might sign with the one of the teams from the divisions that I preview early on, that's just going to be, it is what it is, and you can take that for what you will when you listen to that podcast, whether it's outdated or not. So once again, thank you for listening here on 1045theteam.com and youtube.com/team1045. I'm Eric Hammond. Thank you for listening to the Sittin Sportside podcast.